Hello, my name is Douglas Bloch. Welcome to the Depression Recovery Channel, where each week we talk about practical tools and coping strategies for healing from depression and anxiety. Today is Flashback Friday, a feature in which I republish one of my earlier videos you might not have seen that contains really important coping strategies that will help you attain a better mood. Now here's today's video. Today I want to talk about what I think is a major cause of anxiety and depression, which is not always talked about, and that is childhood trauma. Now, trauma occurs when a person is exposed to overwhelming stress or extreme stress that overwhelms his ability to cope. And the kinds of childhood trauma we're going to talk about are abuse, which is physical, sexual, and verbal, abandonment, and neglect. The earlier these traumas occur in childhood, the more extreme their effect later on in life. I'd like to start by showing how anxiety in the adult can be caused by early childhood trauma. Let's say that you grew up in an alcoholic household, and we'll say your dad's an alcoholic, and normally he's kind of a sweet guy, but when he drinks, he goes from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, comes home rageful, abusive, maybe physically abusive, verbally abusive. Of course, this sends you into a fight or flight state. You're in a state of fear, your muscles tense up, your respiration goes up, your heart rate goes up, your digestion shuts down, you're a mess. But then when the rage stops, you kind of calm down and return to baseline. The problem is that you never know when the person's going to get drunk again, and you're in a state of hypervigilance. You're on the lookout, maybe this time, maybe that time. And so you're constantly worrying, your muscles are tense. This sounds like generalized anxiety disorder, and it is. So when you're growing up in a place where violence or abuse can occur randomly, you never really let down your guard, and you become chronically anxious. There's another kind of trauma that can cause anxiety, and that is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This was first recognized when Vietnam vets came back with all these symptoms of trauma like nightmares and hypervigilance and irritability and anger, hostility. And since then, PTSD has been recognized as a serious psychiatric disorder. Other examples of PTSD can occur through being raped or being in a serious car accident. I have one story to share where I was doing a workshop on depression and anxiety at Brighton Bush Hot Springs here in Oregon, and one of my group members was a Vietnam War vet. It was 30 years after the war in 2003, and he was still having nightmares and trouble sleeping. Now, on this particular evening, one of the members of the group talked about finding the body of his cousin who had committed suicide. Immediately, the person walked out of the room. I followed him, and he said, "This was so traumatic to hear this. I don't think I can go to sleep tonight. I'm just going to stay up because I'm afraid I'm going to have a really bad nightmare." So I hung out with him, and we walked around the grounds and sat in the hot springs until 3 a.m. and finally he was able to relax enough and get to sleep. Now I'd like to show how early trauma or trauma in general can lead to depression. When I was in graduate school, I came across a major book in its field, in the field of psychology, called Learned Helplessness by Martin Seligman. And in this book, he talks about these experiments he did with dogs where he gave them electrical shocks, put them in cages. Now, one group of dogs got shocks about every minute or two, and so after a while they could kind of time when the shocks would occur and they'd be able to jump up off the grid and avoid them. But the second group of dogs got random shots. They never knew when they were going to happen, and so there was no way of avoiding these shocks, and they just began to realize that they were helpless to do anything about them. When the cage was opened and a shock was applied, the dogs who had been able to avoid the shocks just ran out the cage. But the ones who were helpless sat there defeated, dejected, and didn't do anything. They didn't even try to get out of the cage, even though they essentially were free. Martin Seligman soon realized that he had found a model, or accidentally discovered a model, that would explain depression in humans, and he called it learned helplessness. Now here's an example. One of my clients grew up in a household where their parents were constantly fighting, physically fighting, yelling at each other, and she tried everything she could to get them to stop but to no avail. So finally she gave up and said, there's nothing I can do. Now as an adult, when I suggest she try something, some new activity to help alleviate her depression, her response is, why bother? Nothing's going to change. She learned from her past that anything she did wouldn't amount to anything. She was helpless and depressed. Here's a second example of learned helplessness. A man grows up, watches his mother. Actually, this is my family, so why don't I make it personal, okay? Me, Douglas Bloch, grows up watching my mother berate and criticize my father. He does nothing to defend himself. Then, 20 years later, I meet a woman, not the woman I'm with now, but another woman who has an anger management problem and is yelling and criticizing me, and I feel like I can't do anything. I'm afraid of a woman's anger. I can't stand up to it. And so I just let it keep happening until eventually we split up, thank God. That was a blessing in disguise. But I can't believe how my father modeled for me powerlessness, and that's what I experienced and expressed growing up. Another kind of trauma that can lead to depression is abandonment. For example, losing a parent before the age of 11 is one of the best predictors of depression in adults. Abraham Lincoln lost his mother when he was 9. Sylvia Plath, the great poet, lost her father when she was 9. And William Styron lost his mother when he was 11. Remember, William Styron is the novelist who wrote the book Darkness Visible. And these abandonments create grief that, if not processed, will show up later on as depression. Now, abandonment can also happen through divorce, parents splitting up, one of the parents leaving the family. And what happens here is that when people grow up, they often have a fear of being abandoned and often even avoid trying to get into intimate relationships. And this can be a major problem in having attachments. The last trauma I want to talk about is neglect. We've talked about abandonment, we talked about abuse, and then there's neglect. Now, this neglect can be physical or emotional. For example, I have a client who said, my parents were really good about providing for my basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, but they really weren't very emotional. They were kind of cold and distant. And matter of fact, I felt like I was growing up in a boarding house. And another client said, well, you think that's bad? My parents sent me away to boarding school when I was 12. And I was suddenly ripped from my family, and I felt like nobody really cared about me. Both of these people suffer from depression as adults, and they're still working on it. So if you've been traumatized by the past, what can you do about it? Now, while talk therapies are often helpful, they're often not enough, because trauma is held in the body. There's a wonderful book about trauma that I highly recommend to anybody who's had traumatic events in the past. It's called The Body Keeps the Score by psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk. And what he recommends in this book is that you choose therapies that directly affect the body and physiology, such as yoga and deep breathing and Hakomi therapy and EMDR and massage and dance. He lists a whole array of them in the book and shows how we have to incorporate these body therapies in addition to the talk therapies that a person might be doing. The other thing that van der Kolk feels is essential to healing from trauma is social support. And here is how he defines social support. Being truly heard and seen by people around us, feeling that we are held in someone's mind and heart. For our physiology to calm down, we need a visceral feeling of safety. No doctor can write a prescription for friendship and for love. This kind of support is exactly what happens in the support groups I run for depression and anxiety. People bond, they get to know each other, they care about each other, they hold each other in each other's hearts. And over time, this sense of community and belonging and love creates a powerful healing force that really helps people recover. In conclusion, if you have unresolved trauma from the past that you think may be causing your anxiety and depression, you should go out in your area and seek a therapist who specializes in the treatment of trauma. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about the nature of trauma, what causes it, and how it can be healed, I highly recommend that you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. This has been Douglas Bloch. I hope you found the information on this Flashback Friday video helpful. If so, please give it a like, as likes draw more and more people to this channel and hopefully some more subscribers. You can also leave your comments in the comments section or email me, douglasbloch@gmail.com. If you do want to subscribe to this channel, click on my photo in the closing credits. You'll be taken to my subscribe page. And if you click on the bell to the right, you'll be notified every time I do a new video or live chat. And if you want to contribute to this channel and become a patron, simply click on the Patreon image. You'll be taken to my crowdfunding site. And until next video, I wish you the best in your mental health recovery. Thank you so much.